It's so good to see more and more of you here and new faces. It's actually thrilling. So it's just wonderful to be here with all of you this morning. This is a reading from Whispers from Eternity, which is a book of prayer demands, we call, Swami Kriyananda and Yogananda called them, written by Paramahansa Yogananda. This is number 89, Demand for Calmness in Activity. Father, teach me to be calmly active and actively calm. Let me become a prince of peace, sitting on the throne of inner poise as I direct my kingdom of activity. Well, happy Divine Mother's Day to all of you. And that means all of you. Doesn't matter what bodies we came into this time. I thought I would start by reading yesterday, maybe many of you know, but as I look around, many of you wouldn't know that Robert Zadek sent out a very funny list of, these are things that second graders, so they're 7 years old, wrote in answer to the following questions. I'm just going to read a few of them. I know some of you have read them, but they're very funny. The first one was, how did God make mothers? And one of the children said, magic plus superpowers and a lot of stirring. What ingredients are mothers made of? God makes mothers out of clouds and angel hair and everything nice in the world and one dab of mean. What kind of a little girl was your mom? And the child answered, I don't know because I wasn't there, but my guess would be pretty bossy. And another one said, they say she used to be nice. What did mom need to know about dad before she married him? So this child says, does he make at least $800 a year? Did he say no to drugs and yes to chores? And just one more. What's the difference between moms and dads? Dads are taller and stronger, but moms have all the real power because that's who got you to ask. That's who you have to ask if you want to sleep over at your friends. And then just this last one. Remember, what's the difference between moms and dads? Moms have magic. They make you feel better without medicine. Very sweet. I love diving into children's minds. I wanted to read one other thing to you from Autobiography of a Yogi, because this whole concept of Divine Mother that Lakshmi mentioned in the fire ceremony is really brought to us through Paramahansa Yogananda, our guru, Swami Kriyananda's guru. And it just, I think we can all feel, makes God so accessible when that whole notion of the divine, when we think of mother, just like many of these little cute sayings showed us. It's easier to go to mom. You expect a little softness and kindness. I wanted to read when, I'm forgetting now exactly how old Yogananda was, but he was very young, like maybe 12 or 13, I think, when his mother passed. And he awakened at night with a vision. She was out of town actually preparing, most of you know this story from Autobiography, for his older brother's wedding. And he had this vision. She came to him and said to him, awaken your father and come immediately if you would see me. And he woke his father up, but his father didn't believe him. His father called it a hallucination. Anyway, this story goes on. his father would not leave at night, said, we'll go in the morning. They went in the morning, and when they arrived, she had already passed. It was devastating for Yogananda, as he tells it. This is always that line that we run into with avatars and great saints. We don't know how much is for us or how much do they actually live through because they have taken an incarnation. They are in a human body. But he tells it that as if he was devastated. He says, years passed before any reconciliation entered my heart. Storming the very gates of heaven, my cries at last summoned the Divine Mother. Her words brought final healing to my suppurating wounds. So, years, he said. And then this is the line that this is the truth that he shares with us that is so beautiful for all of us. He said, Divine Mother appeared to him, and she said, it is I who have watched over thee life after life in the tenderness of many mothers. See in my gaze those two black eyes. She was referring to how he looked at his mother's eyes. The lost, beautiful eyes thou seekest. She's saying, God is always with you. The Divine Mother aspect of God is always there, has always been there. I'm there behind all of your mothers. And it's just so, if we just let that in, that would probably release us from so many of our fears and so many of our just tendencies to be hooked on feelings. Mother is always with us. God is always with us. What a very calming, uplifting, soothing thought. Took Yogananda right out of his pain. Yesterday we had we could call it a work day here, but none of us who were here would call it a work day at all. We call it Rajasi Day. Rajasi was Yogananda's most highly advanced male disciple. In fact, he became the leader of Self-Realization Fellowship when Master died. He was, of course, an extraordinary being, though he describes himself before he found Yogananda. His words were, I was anxious, I was constantly worried, my body was sick, my mind was sick. He said, in a quote at one point, I was a wreck all the time. This is how he spoke of himself. However, the first night that he met Yogananda in 1932, Yogananda touched him at the point between the eyebrows, and he entered this state called samadhi, or total freedom from all karma and all hold that the ego has on us. That nobody but highly, highly evolved saints can enter that state. So he was maybe feeling like he was a wreck, but he was a very great soul in that body. He was a self-made multi-millionaire, which in the 30s was way more money than a multi-millionaire now. Very efficient, very smart, very capable, started and ran a lot of different businesses. But from the instant he met Yogananda, he dove deep into meditation. After that experience with samadhi, Yogananda said to him, I am asking you to make sure that you set aside some part of every day for meditation, no matter what, because he was very, very busy in the world. He had a lot to do, like Martha's dinner, but this was a little different manifestation of that. All the same, when our ego gets into it, by the way, whether you're as Swamiji said in some other reading, slicing, dicing, sifting, and stirring. I don't know what he said. Martha got totally drawn into. That's what became so important to her, making that meal. She saw it, I mean, as you just heard, as the thing she was supposed to do. It was the most important thing, and her sister should be helping her, of course, until Jesus informed her otherwise. But Rajarsi had these huge companies, and they took managing and running, and Master said to him, you have to meditate every day. So his home, for a lot of reasons, was not conducive to that. So he would go into his office early. He would put a sign on his door that said, in conference. He said, I never bothered to say I was in conference with God, but that's where he was. And he would leave a note for his secretary to not disturb him. Every day, he just committed himself to 3 hours, I think it was, or 4, every morning of meditation, because Yogananda had reminded him that he needed to stay in tune with what was important in his life. And remember, Yogananda, he helped Yogananda out of many financial difficulties. The money, the business, it mattered. It was important to the existence of Self-Realization Fellowship, or it looked that way at the time. But he was always reminded, as Jesus was just saying to Martha, what's important here is your attunement with me. What's important here is keeping your heart open so that I can enter and help you maintain this balance, help your businesses go. It's always the attunement with the divine that we're seeking in every activity, every activity. If we could see everything we do, everything with everyone as serving God, then we would be free. Of course, that's very challenging for all of us. But Master was helping Rajarsi. And I'm saying all of this to you because Rajarsi, who was the quintessential version of a lot of activity in life, but always remembering that it was everything he did could lead him to deeper and deeper attunement with God, which is ultimately the whole goal of our spiritual path. Swamiji said this so beautifully in a book he wrote called Sadhu Beware, but somebody put it up on the ananda.org website the other day, which led me to go back and reread the whole book yesterday. But he wrote, Swamiji wrote, the first duty of every soul is to release the hold ego consciousness has upon it. All other spiritual practices are subservient to this one supreme obligation. I address ego transcendence, therefore, as the first and indeed the only challenge on the spiritual path. That is just so beautifully said. It's powerful. It's clear. It's like, make no mistake about it. Whatever we're doing, and of course we're all doing a lot. We're all on this path that he talks about of releasing the hold that the ego has on it. That's what every soul is hungry for. But the ego's very good at what it does. But Swamiji says here, the first and indeed the only challenge on the spiritual path. And it's true. When we back up and we look at, we find ourselves off the path, misbehaving, not really feeling God in so many moments. If we back up far enough, we always find out that we're out of tune. We've allowed our ego to step in and give us a sense, as Martha had, of self-importance, even with a meal. And of course, the whole point of that story, which Swamiji says clearly to us, is whatever we're doing, it doesn't matter what the what is. If we do it without attachment, but rather chanting, looking into God's Master's eyes while we're doing it, thinking, how can we keep our heart open that she could say, Lord, I'm making this meal for you. What a joy, what a gift to stay in touch with God's consciousness, that everything we do becomes an act of serving God. Everything. I remember many years ago, I want to come back and finish something about Rajasi, but it's not a story, it's a truth. It just came to mind. Many of you have heard it. I had a very busy, really busy medical practice up in San Carlos. I mean, it kept me busy from 7 in the morning till 10, 11 at night, awake a lot at night with calls. I was into medicine. It was beautiful. I loved it. And the story behind that story is that I was inspired to go into medicine, so I never felt far away from God when I was practicing medicine. But one day I came to this church, and I think Krishna Dewey was here at the time in the office. And I said to her, how can I serve here? And at that time, all of the pews were still here. This still was a Catholic, it looked much more like a Catholic church than it does now. She said, well, she was really hesitant, you could see, because I was in the world this busy doctor. And I said, anything, I'll do anything. She said, well, the pews need cleaning every week. No problem. So I took off every Thursday afternoon, and I came here, and I cleaned, and at times waxed those pews. I always had music on. I can't remember right now. I don't think we had that Om CD yet, but maybe we did. But something like that. And for 2 or 3 hours, I wiped off the pews. Now, I didn't have the language then that I have now. I didn't have the language then to talk. It's not that I know so much more now. I know a little more, but I didn't have the language to talk about what I didn't know. Now I have the language to talk about what I don't know. But I knew enough that every time I came here with an altar, with music, just cleaning the pews, that answers came to me, diagnoses for patients, issues with my staff, issues at home. Things got resolved in those hours, just dusting and waxing with right attitude. Whereas when I was in the office, maybe with a manager or a nurse, maybe my attitude wasn't right. I started feeling like the boss, or like I knew how things were supposed to be. I'd love to tell you I'm totally beyond that. Most of you sitting in this room know I am not. But it's nice to have the goal. It's nice to be working on it every day. It's nice to look back and to be able to notice the times that we stay attuned, that we're listening to our soul's call more than the demands of ego, and that whatever we're doing with right attitude, because that's what Swamiji's telling us. It's not the activity, it's the attitude behind it. It's never the activity. So back to Rajasi. Rajasi, who was this big force in the world, he would write Yogananda these letters all the time, and he would sign them, your little one, or just, he would put a little dot and then a 1. Such humility, such constant remembrance that God is really acting through us, that God is, as Master said, nearer than the near or your dearest. I'm sorry, I'm blocking on the thing, but I'm closer to you than everyone you think you're close to. I am you. As Lakshmi was just saying, God's love in our fire ceremony. God's love is here. We are that love. We just need to find those ways to remember, which is not easy. how do we take that peace from our morning meditations out into the world? We meditate such a small part of our day compared to how much we're out doing what we often call work, but what we could transform into service all the time, everything we do. This is what happened here yesterday. Anybody who was here would tell you, first of all, we were doing it remembering Rajarsi, so that part of him, that it's not even humility, it's beyond humility. It's an absolute knowing that God is here in every moment, that we are one. Durga Mata wrote about him in one of the pieces that she wrote. She said watching him and Master come together was the most beautiful, I think she called it sweet, thing she'd ever seen. She said every time they came together, it was like they fell in love again. Their love was ever new, she said, which is what true love is, and I agree with her. And if we could remember that whatever we're doing, to fall in love with it, can you imagine how each of our lives would be transformed? So we were working, serving, enjoying everything we were doing, probably with Rajarsi's presence. And I don't know how often any of us tuned into that, but that was the case. I mean, people were doing, I was in the kitchen out here with Kripa Mai. I hope I don't embarrass her. She happens to be here today. She was cleaning an old kitchen that when all's said and done, it's still going to be an old and not very attractive kitchen. But with such joy, with such willingness, beyond everything that was asked of her, she worked in there alone, taking scrapers to get grease that was probably as old as that kitchen off of places. It was so beautiful and so inspiring that I would go out and do another task, empty garbage, wipe windowsills, doesn't matter what it is. It was never the activity yesterday. There were 40 people here serving and loving each other in the process. You could feel it with such joy, all of what could have been called menial tasks. Nobody thought they were menial tasks. People were just uplifted. And again, we didn't stop and chant yesterday. We usually do. But I held that music deep within, and I'll bet other people did. And the vibration of being in the book and gift shop where God is always in front of you. Attunement is everything. If we're acting with restlessness, we will not find God. Restlessness is a quality of the ego. Our job is, what did Swami call it in the peaceful preoccupation? No, restless preoccupation and peaceful something, whatever it was. We have to keep even reminding ourselves it's okay to put notes around your house or in your pockets or on your computers that say, remember God, think about God, take a break. Even my car, my GPS on my car pops up and says, you've been driving a long time. Do you think it's time to take a break? It reminds me. We can find ways. At the end of this book, Sadhu Beware, Swamiji, the last, I don't even know if it's the very last thing, but he has an entire chapter. I'm not even going to mention any of them. It's just listing things. And that's not what I want to be doing right now, but look at it. We all have access to the book. Techniques for, just want to see, techniques of ego transcendence. And I just love the way he says that. How are we going to transcend this ego? How are we? It's easy when we love people. It's easy when you're holding your little grandchild or your child's doing well and you're thrilled to hear from them, or you have a dear friend. How do we get beyond that when it's more difficult? I've been thinking a lot about this in one way recently because, you know, we all come in with a lot of karma. We all come in with likes and dislikes, and we're drawn certain ways. And we meet each other, and we're one big spiritual family, but we don't like everyone. That happens. And we've all been together now for a long time. And when I was in my seclusion, I thought, I would love to, here I am saying it now for all the world to hear, but write notes with certain people where I've been a block. I'm not accusing anybody of anything. I've been a block because I came in with a lot of good qualities, but I also came in with a huge personality. It's just, I'm big. It's a lot to deal with me, and I know that. And many people love it. That's great. And other people are like this. But I thought, what if I put out a letter that said, can we just forget about the personality? We are so highly evolved spiritually, those of us who are in this spiritual family. We've gone through a lot of lives. We're making great effort. Can we just see God in each other and love that and just forget about the personality? Forget, don't think that we're cooking a soup. It's all the same thing. It's moving to a higher place within ourselves and not taking what we're doing or those little things that annoy us about each other. It's like, what? At some point in his writing, Swamiji talks about our job is to remove the, he calls them barnacles. They are like barnacles. Those little, you know, like that. You just don't like, whatever it is, a job, a person. I think, why would we allow ourselves to continue when it would be so easy to open our hearts and win? We win. It's not like we're giving anybody else something. We are, because they'll feel that love flowing through. But look at what we can get. There are many, many ways to talk about making soup. Many ways, or dinner. And when we look at our own lives, that's what we need to look at. I was talking with Keshava the other day, and this story came back to me for a different reason than I'm going to tell it now, but it's a beautiful story of when I went up to the Asian Art Museum years ago. Some of you have heard this. I went, it was the second or third time that I went to watch the Dalai Lama's monks. They were doing sand mandalas, thank you. And it was beautiful. There were, I think, 4 or 6 of them, and they had the whole area roped off, and they had been there for almost a month. At the end of the month, the mandala would be finished, and they were actually going to have a ceremony, taking it to the ocean and letting the ocean take it back, which was just so beautiful. So this was the 3rd time you were allowed in, and you would just sit and meditate with them as they dropped sand 1 grain at a time, making this exquisite mandala. I watched it grow. So here we are, a few days away from the finish, and in comes flying in a woman who was literally in the middle of a psychotic break. She became totally psychotic. She burst through the ropes, dove onto the mandala, and just started making mayhem. I mean, the guards were there, the police came. You know, it was frightening for some of us. We all just sat there. It took them at least 45 minutes to restrain her, get her out. When all was said and done, and she was gone, the monks took their arms, wiped away the sand. They just were sitting there and just started over. It was such a magnificent live example of living example of non-attachment, of doing something for the love of God, just being in the moment and doing it. and remembering all the time that that's what we're doing. Again, even when it's hard, there are ways to do it. I have another story that came to mind this morning from my medical practice was the time, and again, I'm not going to tell the whole story. Many of you have heard it, but I was working in a Catholic hospital, St. Agnes in Baltimore. The nuns ran the hospital, and almost all of the nuns were my patient. They had come into my practice. One day, the head nun, I don't know what you call her, but she was the head nun and the head of the hospital, brought her father into me, told me he had been having back pain since the night before. The medicine of it is not all that important. I just had an intuition that something was very wrong with him. Both of my partners were away that day. I was seeing their emergencies, my schedule. It's a lot. There was a lot in my mind. You're thinking 3 other rooms are filled with people waiting for me. And I remember having, really God's grace descended is what happened. And I was reminded, because I had the intuition, I think I said this, something was really wrong, but I had no idea what. He had this marking on his side, this blotching of skin. And I felt maybe that meant something, but I couldn't remember what. And I just kept repeating to myself, call on God, call on God, call on God. I forget the man's name. His daughter was there. I need to send you to the hospital. He says, I'm not going to the hospital. Oh, God, Shanti, let God in. Yes, you are. You're going to the hospital. No, I'm not. Do you want to get in your daughter's car, or do you want me to call 911? Okay, I'll get in my daughter's car. I mean, it was just that constant being able to stay in the moment. That was a challenging moment, but with grace, I could remember to do that. Call the ER. I have no idea what's going on with this man, but it feels bad to me. Please be ready for him. Anyway, the man, I didn't know the sign. I didn't know what was happening. The sign actually had a name. I probably should have known. He gets to the ER. They get him up to surgery. Has this huge aneurysm on his aorta that as they open him, it ruptures. Oh, I remember, because I said to him, you have to go. I'll go with my daughter, but I need to go home and get a toothbrush. No, you're not getting any toothbrush, right? You know, I mean, whatever the challenge is, the hardest thing is if a boss is yelling at us, or we don't like someone, or we're in a rush getting a meal on the table, and we think that's the most important thing, or we have too many patients in the room, or on and on and on. Life delivers us every opportunity, all the time, to deepen our attunement to God. And when Swamiji says, he says here, about that I just read to you, about releasing the egoic hold, right after that, he says, attunement, I am convinced, is the first and greatest need on the path, excuse me. It is the final goal of renunciation and the only way to find God. These are Swamiji's words. They're extraordinary words. If we just read those 2 paragraphs, one sentence in a little paragraph, every day, never mind that he gives us 20-some techniques for ego transcendence. It's all that matters. Nothing else matters. Just finding your way. And as a friend said to me the other day, who's just gone through excruciating pain in her life, excruciating, a woman whose young son died suddenly, and I was with her just a couple of mornings ago, and she would be sobbing and then look at me and say to me, I know there can't be any mistakes. I know that. There's no mistakes. No, we're drawing everything to us. So all we need to do is, what is the line from Master's poem, God, God, God? In the battle din of activity, my silent soul cry will be, God, God, God. In the battle din of activity, that's all of our lives. That's such a beautiful phrase from that song. It doesn't mean just going out and going to battle. We are doing battle, and we're not alone. And that's what we have to remember. And whether the dinner turns out okay or not doesn't matter. But here's the final wonderful news. If you make that dinner attuning yourself to the divine, if you leave your heart open and you allow peace and love and joy to descend and fill you, it'll be the best dinner you ever cooked. No matter what anybody says, when they taste it, they will say to you, what did you put in this? Just a little bit of divine love, a little bit of joy, a little bit of peace, calmness, all of those beautiful aspects of the divine. This is the purpose of this life. This is where we're all headed. This is what we can do ever more consciously, minute by minute. God bless you.
Baby Tim's in the nursery, asleep in his playpen, his calico pony close by. It's all set if a dream calls to carry its master away to a calico sky. And I sit by my window and wonder why it's only in dreams we can fly. Why a pony can't hurdle the sunset. Maybe that's what makes small babies cry. Daddy sits in his study and hums with his reading the tune of his favorite song. He tells me his homework seems nicer and lighter with music to speed it along. And I sit by my window and wonder why a book has no song of its own. Why the world doesn't flood us with music. And why people must sing all alone. Mommy's out in the kitchen, she's cooking our dinner. I hear by the clink of the pans that she's happy just cooking and knowing we're near her. Her happiness flows from her hands. And I sit by my window and wonder what the world without mothers would be. And if people could live without loving, such a world I hope never to see. And I sit by my window and wonder what the world without mothers would be. And if people could live without loving, such a world I hope never to see.